Good evening, everyone. My name is Tanner Menard. I am the organizing manager with Equality Arizona. Equality Arizona's mission is to build a strong and resilient LGBTQ plus social movement and culture in Arizona by increasing access to safety, well-being, and inclusion in society. And this is the third in a series of town halls that are meant to expand our conversation beyond policy and towards the heart of why we work for the people in our community. We are extremely honored to be joined by Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, Murphy Abair, Will Ganoa, and Donovan Carr for a discussion on voting rights. And we would like to encourage everyone to sign up to for volunteer opportunities to help protect our rights as LGBTQ plus Arizonan. There are going to be links posted and available in the chat. And I'm personally very honored to welcome you, Secretary Hobbs. She will open with a brief remarks and will answer 2 to 3 questions before we begin a deeper conversation with other members of the department. And I'll just briefly read your bio for everyone, Secretary Hobbs. Secretary Hobbs has led a life of service, beginning as a volunteer at her church and continuing with her job as a social worker and Chief Compliance Officer at one of the largest domestic violence centers in the US. The focus of her life has been to help others and to gain security, to be heard, and to create better lives. That fundamental motivation inspired her to run for Secretary of State after serving in the Arizona House of Representatives and Arizona Senate as Minority Leader. Now, she brings her years of experience to the office of the Secretary of State to ensure that it runs productively and that Arizona elections are secure, fair, and efficient. Secretary Hobbs has a Bachelor of Social Work from Northern Arizona University and a Master of Social Work from Arizona State University. She has been a professional social worker since 1992. Prior to being elected to the legislature, she worked in areas of domestic violence, behavioral health, and homelessness. She's been honored with dozens of awards for her service. Most recently, she was named the League of Cities and Towns Legislative Champion for 2 consecutive years. And Secretary Hobbs and her husband, Pat Goodman, live in Phoenix and have 2 kids, 1 dog, and 4 cats. Welcome, Secretary Hobbs. It's so good to speak with you.
Hi, thank you so much, Tanner, for that introduction. I'm so excited to be here. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I am Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, and I am especially thankful to the team at Equality Arizona for partnering with our office to provide this opportunity to talk with all of you about voting and elections. During the 2020 general election, more than 3.42 million ballots were cast, and turnout was nearly 80%. Arizonans showed up in huge numbers for our democracy, and we expect them to do the same in 2022. And that's why my office knew that it was critical to host this series of town halls as a way to provide up-to-date information about the election and discuss voter education and outreach. I'm very excited about the presentations that we're all going to hear today. In 2021 and 2022, we saw many attempts to suppress our freedom to vote with new election laws and proposed bills. So it's more important now than ever that voters are aware of the changes that they should expect this year and what they need to know to ensure that their voices are heard. We want to share these updates with you because honestly, one of the biggest threats to our elections is the campaign of misinformation and disinformation, or just flat out lies, primarily through social media. The goal of this kind of strategy is to undermine the public's faith in our elections and the democratic process overall. We know that these efforts are underway now and will continue throughout the election cycle. That's why we've partnered with secretaries of state across the country again in our Trusted Info 2022 campaign, which is aimed at fighting against mis and disinformation related to elections here in Arizona and across the country. Everyone has a part to play in helping respond to these attacks on our democracy. Be sure that you're looking at and sharing articles from reputable sources and encouraging your friends and family to do the same. Get your election information from verified websites and the social media accounts of election officials. It is also incredibly important to participate in events like this one, where you're getting up-to-date information directly from your election officials. I also want to encourage anyone who still hasn't registered to vote to do so today. And there are a lot of ways that you can do that here in Arizona. You can go online to servicearizona.com if you have an Arizona driver's license or an Arizona non-operating ID card. You can register by mail, either by printing off a form online at the Secretary of State's website or your county recorder's office, or request a form from your county recorder. And then after completing the registration form, mail it back to your county recorder's office. Or you can register in person by visiting any county recorder's office to fill out a form. If you are registered, it is also important to check your registration to ensure that it's up to date. And you need to update your registration if you've moved, if your name has been legally changed, or if you want to change your political affiliation. And you can find out more about doing this and how to do it at arizona.vote. And if you don't remember anything else from this presentation, arizona.vote is the place where you can get the most up-to-date information about participating in the upcoming elections. We will continue updating our website and provide updates and critical election information periodically as we move through the 2022 election season. Every Arizona voter, first of all, has my thanks, but also should absolutely know that you can stand proud that our elections are conducted with transparency, accuracy, and fairness in accordance with Arizona's laws and elections procedures, despite numerous unfounded claims to the contrary. One of the best ways that we can protect the integrity of our elections and voting is to confront the doubt that some are purposefully sowing in our democratic institutions with accurate, timely, and credible information. Thank you all so much for your interest in this. I'd like to remind folks that democracy is a team sport. Keeping elections fair, secure, and transparent takes the dedication of countless people. And with that in mind, I want to thank you all again for joining us today to have this important conversation. And I'd love to stay and take a few questions if you would like.
Secretary, we got some questions ahead of time when people registered to vote. And so I'd like to ask 3 of those to you. The first one is someone wrote, how can I help myself and others to get their ballots properly cast? Will my in-ballots exist and are they counted or only in a runoff?
Yes, so I think the most important thing, and I mentioned it in my remarks, is checking your voter registration status to just make sure that it's up to date. The worst thing that can happen is if you show up at the polls and find out that you're not registered or that there's something wrong with your registration. So checking that early is important. And then also, if you're not registered, you can register to vote anytime, but know that there is a voter registration deadline 30 days before every election. So if you're not registered and you want to vote in the August 2nd general election, the voter registration deadline is 30 days before that. Same with the November general election. You only have to register once, but if you want to participate in the election, you have to make sure it's 30 days before that election. Making sure that, and then tell your friends, to your family members, everyone who also is concerned, to make sure that their voter registration status is up to date. And again, do that at arizona.vote. That's the most comprehensive place to go to find all this information. So I think the second part of the question referred to mail-in ballots. Every single ballot that is cast, that is a valid ballot, is counted in every single election. It doesn't matter if you participate by mail, if you participate early in person at early voting sites, if you go to the polling place on election day. All of those are valid ways to vote, and those ballots are all counted. No matter if there's a runoff, if the election is close, if it's not close, they're all valid ballots and they're all counted. And there was so much confusion about that last election, so it's no wonder that people have these kind of questions. But if you vote in a legal manner in Arizona, your vote is valid and it is counted.
Thank you so much. And the next question is, are purging of voter rolls planned, and how would we know if we've been purged? Also, what can the individual voter go to protect voting rights for Arizona citizens?
So another great question. So first, I want to start off by saying that county recorders, and the county recorder, if you don't know this, is the elected official in every single county that is responsible for the maintenance of voter registration. They are the elected registrar of voters. And so they do perform routine maintenance on the voter registration rolls to make sure that they're current and up to date, like if people move or if they die and those kinds of things. So that is not purging. And again, to make sure that you're helping them with that process, if you do move, make sure that you're updating your voter registration with your current information. But there are two bills that were passed and signed into law that address this purging issue. The first one is not specifically about being purged from the voter rolls, but it's being purged from what we have in Arizona that used to be called the permanent early voter list. This law changed that to the active early voter list. And so people who sign up to get their mail-in ballot for every single election, that used to be the permanent early voter list. And this law now requires county recorders to remove people from that list if they don't use their mail-in ballot for 4 subsequent elections, starting with the primary election in August of this year. So the August primary, the November general, August of primary of 2024, and the general of 2024. So if you're on the active early voter list and you don't use your mail-in ballot for all 4 of those elections, then you'll be removed. That doesn't remove you as a voter, it just removes you from that active early voter list. And so to make sure that you maintain that, just use your mail-in ballot. And then the second one is a much more concerning and problematic bill that was just passed and signed into law by Governor Ducey. Now, it's not in effect yet because the legislature is still in session, and I think Will is probably going to talk more about this, but it requires additional levels of proof of citizenship to vote that over and above what Arizona already requires, not to vote, but to register to vote. And so this law will actually remove currently registered voters from the voter rolls. It will affect seniors, people who don't have access to birth certificates or don't have a driver's license. It violates federal law. It's very likely unconstitutional. The legislature's own lawyers told them it was. They passed it anyway. And so there has already been 2 lawsuits filed to try to stop this law. And so we don't know if this is going to be in effect for the upcoming elections or not. And I don't want to speculate whether it will or not, but what I can tell you, again, Arizona.vote is the place where we are going to provide all of the information voters need to participate in an election. So if things change with regard to how the laws that are in place right now, Arizona.vote is where we'll keep you informed about that. So it's a really good resource to have to share with people who are concerned about that. We'll be keeping that information updated if that law actually is going to impact this upcoming elections in 2022. And then I think, again, just how people can protect our right to vote. The things I've already mentioned, Arizona.vote, get your information from trusted sources, checking your voter registration status, but also our democracy depends on a cadre of people stepping up to participate in making sure that everyone can exercise their freedom to vote by volunteer. It's actually a paid position, but it's a stipend, volunteering at polling places, both early voting and on election day, and then following election day, helping with the tabulation process. And again, you can find out how to sign up to do that at Arizona.vote or through your county recorder's office.
Thank you so much. And then the last question that I'll ask to you is, someone writes, it is my understanding that Arizona's early voting has been going on for many years and has increased in usage over the years. Were there ever any concerns or complaints about this process prior to fake news about election fraud in 2020? And then they go on to say, just curious, any idea of the percentage of Republican voters who trusted mail-in voting and were using it ongoing prior to 2020?
So another really great question. Arizona has had no excuse absentee voting or mail-in voting for decades. And it was passed by a Republican majority legislature. We were one of the first states to implement this before many states were doing universal voting by mail. And so we've had a long history with a successful track record of early voting and voting by mail, and it has increased in usage. It's very popular among all political parties. And then the permanent early voter list that I just talked about, which doesn't exist anymore, it does. It's called the active early voter list now. That was implemented also by a Republican majority legislature, again, to make it more convenient for people to vote by mail. So they didn't have to request a ballot at every single election. They were just on the list and get their ballot. And again, that is also 75% of registered voters choose to be on that active early voter list, and that's regardless of party. And so it really was this last election where the president himself was sowing, the former president was sowing all kinds of misinformation about vote by mail, the security of vote by mail, and also at the same time working to create problems or the perception of problems with the postal service that had people very concerned about whether their mail-in ballot would be received and counted. So that is all very recent. And I can tell you, I don't know, in the most recent update that we have in our office, there are about the same number of Republicans and Democrats signed up for the active early voter list, and it's 1.1 million of each, so roughly. And so it does enjoy wide usage, even among elected officials who are some of the loudest voices attacking it right now.
Secretary, thank you so much for joining us. And it's just really an honor to get to speak with you. Thank you for answering a few questions for us and for your remarks. This is a wonderful service that you're doing for the community, and particularly for the LGBTQ community. So I just want to, again, say thank you for joining us. I know that this is a special day for you also. So
thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to be with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Donovan Carr, who will give us a presentation. Welcome, Donovan Yat A. It's good to see you here, and we're so glad that you joined us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tanner. And yes, good evening, Yat A. My name's Donovan Carr. I am Navajo Diné from Northern Arizona. I'm the outreach coordinator and tribal liaison for the Secretary of State's office. I want to take a few minutes and go over some voter basics and voter information that we want every eligible voter to be aware of and kind of have in there as a tool bag of tricks for our election season. Part of our goal is to make sure that our voters are informed and empowered with correct information. And so let's get started. I've got a short presentation here I want to pull up. Let's see. Probably a share screen button.
Gene, I think we may need to make Donovan a co-host.
Right.
I think you should be able to screen share now. I had it set to only host, and now it's all panelists.
All right. Y'all able to see that? Okay, so is everyone able to see the PowerPoint presentation? A little slide deck here.
Oh,
All right, let's get started then. So again, we just want our voters to be informed and empowered with correct information in view of all of the proliferation of all the misinformation and disinformation. We want to make sure that you're correlated and you know where you stand in the elections world, especially in 2022. So just to begin a little bit about the Office of the Arizona Secretary of State, we provide several services as the state agency. The one we're most known for is elections, campaign finance, and lobbyist filings. But some of our other responsibilities and services that we provide to Arizonans, of course, is business services, notary publics. We record partnerships and trade names and trademarks. We also operate the State Library, Archives, Public Records, and the Capitol Museum. We house the Administrative Rules Program. And then lastly, the Address Confidentiality Program, which provides confidential addresses to survivors of domestic violence. So lots of responsibilities there. But as I said before, we're most known for elections, providing, administering the elections in Arizona. And one of the first things that will happen in this whole process is registering an eligible voter. And we want to talk about who can register to vote, what a person needs to register to vote. And so there's just 3 standards you got to meet. You be a citizen, be a resident of Arizona, and a resident of the county that's listed on your voter registration. You've got to be 18 years of age or older on or before the day of the next regular general election. That is just to say that you got to be 18 to vote. Now, this stipulation actually brings up a really awesome component of voter registration in Arizona. We call it pre-registration. And this is an excellent way for our communities to get youth involved in voting and to show our kids and younger members of our communities the electoral process. If a teenager anticipates being 18 years of age on or before the next general election, so this year it's November 8th, that teenager can actually pre-register to vote right now, can submit all the voter registration information, sign up, and then be able to cast their ballot on election day. So that's really awesome. But voter registration, well, who can't register to vote, right? You can't register to vote if you've been, if you're incapacitated, ruled incapacitated by a court of law, or if you've been convicted of a felony and you've not gone through the process of restoring civil rights. For felony convictions, we want to also remember that for first-time felony convictions, these civil rights are actually, they're automatically restored after you've taken care of fines, restitutions, and you've fulfilled sentences. So really important information. And there are programs out there in the state that work with felons to restore civil rights. One of the most notable is the Roads to Rights program, which we work with a lot as well. There's, as Secretary mentioned, there are several ways for Arizonans to register to vote. The easiest is online. Again, as the Secretary said, if there's anything that you retain and remember from our several presentations, Arizona.vote. You can register to vote there with your Arizona driver's license or ID card. You can actually look up your voter registration information. You can update it there. You can access contacts for your county recorder's office and elections departments. So doing it online is actually pretty easy and comprehensive to get all the information you need. You can also do it by mail. I'm from a rural part of Arizona, so I understand by mail very clearly. I'm really glad it's there. You can pick up a voter registration form from your county recorder's office. You can print the form from a local library, fill it out, and then mail the form back to your county recorder's office. You can also do it in person by just walking into your recorder's office and submitting the form in person. Now here's the voter registration form. We did recently get an updated form. My apologies, I didn't update this image, but this is what a voter registration form will look like typically. To register to vote, to provide the information about proof of citizenship. Here's a little bit of information. That's a lot of words. Excuse the paragraphs and paragraphs. Submitting proof of citizenship by your ID. There are several ways to meet this. We want our Arizonans to know the elections timeline. This is really, really important for to be an informed voter. We want to know this timeline because, for instance, the general election is November 8th this year. If we want to vote by mail in that election, or if we want to request a ballot by mail just for this election season only, we want to make sure that we're signed up for all of that by October 28th, or we've requested it by October 28th to be able to cast our ballot and allow sufficient time for our ballots to move through the United States Postal Service. So another big date, of course, is the primaries on August 2nd. And to vote by mail in the August 2nd primaries, we got to make sure that we've requested our ballot by mail, or we've signed up for the active early voting list by July 22nd. And a lot of this information, if you've forgotten it or you're not sure, Arizona.vote. And also, as Secretary said, we want to make sure that we have a good contact information for ourselves, for our elections officials and elections workers to contact us in case there are any issues with our ballot at all. It does happen, and we want our elections workers to be able to contact voters quickly and efficiently. Our elections workers across the state are very vigilant about reaching out and making sure they're able to contact their voters in case of any issues. Now we talk about ways to vote, right? Like we can vote by mail, we can vote in person on election day, or we can vote early in person before election day. And that, I believe that begins 28 days or so before the election. We can mail in our ballot either by just doing a one-time ballot by mail or else using the active early voting list. And there are a couple of options that became popular in light of the that were really awesome options to vote in the 2020 elections. Some county recorders offices and elections departments were equipped and ready to provide curbside voting, where you were able to pull up to a vote site and cast your ballot from your car, fill out your ballot and submit it. So the details about all of that, your county elections department will have the details for voting like that, but these are all the different options for voting. And it really makes it accessible, and that's what we want for our voters in Arizona. When voting in person, you've got to provide a photo ID, and we have 3 lists of IDs that a voter can use when voting in person. List 1 is just a photo ID that has the name and address on it, a state issued identification that's got your photo and then has a valid address on it that matches the registration address. And then if you don't happen to have that, there's 2 more lists of valid identifications that you can actually mix and match. And you can kind of see there's a plethora of options there. Indian census cards, tribal enrollment cards, utility bills, passports, US military identification, just to meet that state issued photo ID with your name and address. And again, echoing the Secretary's highlight of our #TrustedInfo2022 campaign, we want to make sure that our voters can access trusted information, secure information from real elections workers, from real elections officials. And the safest way to do that is Arizona.vote. Arizona.vote is our portal that kind of opens up the whole elections world to our voters. It will have all the county recorders' websites there, their contact information. You can access your own personal voter registration information with your registered county. And along with our Arizona.vote, other trusted sources, of course, are your recorder's website, your recorder's office, and as well the Arizona Clean Elections Commission website. Really awesome resource for educating Arizonans on the basics of government, how elections work, how to actually vote. The Clean Elections Commission is an excellent partner in providing trusted information. We also, along with the Elections Commission, provide nonpartisan voter guides. Our office publishes what we call the publicity pamphlet that provides information on what is on the ballot for that election season. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission provides a voter education guide as well that provides information on the statewide and legislative candidates, their statements, their information, photos of the candidates. So those are really awesome, and you can just get to their website to access that, or come to Arizona.vote and request that. Now, as Secretary said, democracy is a partnership. We want engaged communities because they're healthy communities, and an engaged community provides a healthy democracy and a strong election, a strong, healthy election. We encourage Arizonans to come out to volunteer their time and service to be a poll worker this election season. Some of the trends that we see is typically poll workers are older, in their 60s and 70s. They've been poll workers election season after election season after election season. And in the 2020 election season, we saw, along with the global pandemic, that their participation kind of put them at a higher risk of contracting COVID-19, and it was putting them in danger. And we encourage Arizonans to honor our poll workers, honor their service and sacrifice by passing the torch to Arizonans who are at lower risk of contracting serious illness, and keep democracy going. This is really, really important. There are requirements to be a poll worker. Some of these can be waived depending on the county recorder and their team. And then also according to the need of the vote sites that are calling for poll workers. Here are some of the requirements. You got to be a resident of the county you serve in. This is one of the ones that can be waived if there are extenuating circumstances. You can be registered to vote. be at least 18 years old. And then the county provides required training to you to be a poll worker. So that's really awesome. But when we say you've got to be registered to vote or you've got to be at least 18, some county recorders have created and they actually have programs for high school students to participate in elections to be a poll worker. So these are really awesome student programs, just great step up programs where high school students can come in and help coordinate elections, moving elections equipment from vote sites to recorders' offices, assisting voters, and training is completed and there is a stipend provided. So really awesome opportunity. Here's a little bit more about what poll workers do at election sites. They assist with the curbside voting, which I mentioned earlier. Of course, answering questions and guiding voters through the voting process. And then they're also ensuring voters who are in line by the close of the polls, that those voters are still permitted to vote. They help coordinate all of that. And then they help tear down and shut down and tear down those vote sites after an election. And again, move equipment. On this slide, I'm showing the Become a Poll Worker button. We've actually updated our Arizona.vote website, and this button is not there right now, but it'll come back soon. And you definitely can always reach out to your county recorder to begin talks about how you can serve in the 2020 elections as a poll worker. So, and reach out and we'll get you the information you need to do that. Questions, Arizona.vote. You can also call 1-877-THE-VOTE, but Arizona.vote is easy to remember. You can do it on your cell phone. It's really awesome. That is the gist of my presentation. That's all of it. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Donovan. We appreciate that very much. It's good to have you here, and it's been a joy to work with you as well. So thank you. And now for our legislative update, Will Gaona, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here as well.
Great, thanks. I'm going to share my screen real quick. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. Thanks for having us here, everyone. My name is Will. I'm the Legislative Affairs Director in the Secretary's Office. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of some of the elections and voting rights legislation we've seen introduced in Arizona so far this year. And it's a lot. So we've struggled to keep up with all of it, but some quick statistics. About 140 election-related bills were introduced this session. And this number is a little old. It's probably closer to about 120 of them are already dead, meaning that they aren't expected to move any further than they already have this year. But for a little context, there were a little over 1,500 bills in total introduced this session, which means more than 9% of all the bills introduced had to do with elections or voting rights, which is an extraordinarily high percentage. We usually see lots of legislation on education and healthcare, and some of these issues dominate our legislature, but this session, it's clearly very much about elections and voting rights. And in terms of the legislation we've seen introduced, it tends to fall into three major buckets. One, legislation that's focused on ballot drop boxes. Two, legislation that affects voter registration. And three, legislation that affects early voting. And so we're going to take those one at a time. I'm just going to give you a couple examples of each of these. Obviously, with 140 bills introduced, we can't talk about them all, but I'd like to just give you a little bit of a flavor of the type of legislation we're seeing this year. So let's start with voter registration. HB 2617 is a bill that requires election officials to regularly review all government databases they can access in order to ensure that people who are on the voter rolls are qualified to be on the voter rolls. And it requires election officials to, if they cancel someone's voter registration, if they find out they shouldn't be on the rolls, to forward that voters' information to the county attorney or attorney general for investigation. And so this is a big change in terms of where the onus lies in kind of maintenance here. Normally, when you register to vote, you provide the requisite information, and from that point forward, you're considered a qualified elector. You are a registered voter. This requires elections officials to actively be searching through the rolls, using whatever information they can find to try to remove people from the rolls. And if they do remove someone, to send that information to prosecutors to see if a crime can be prosecuted. So that would be a big change. This bill hasn't passed yet. It still needs a vote in the Senate. HB 2492, this is the bill that Secretary Hobbs referred to. This is actually the only elections related bill that's passed and has been signed into law so far this session. There are, as you mentioned, there's 2 lawsuits attempting to block it. Additionally, the Senate needs to vote on a bill that would delay this for a year. There's a desire to delay this until after the 2022 election to kind of perhaps avoid confusion and things from the new rules inside of it. But in a nutshell, it requires additional proof of citizenship, but also requires things like if you're registering to vote on a paper form, you have to provide some kind of proof of residence. So you put your address on the form, but you also have to prove that you actually live at that address with something like perhaps a utility bill or a bank statement or other things that are on that list. So it's requiring additional information from voters when they want to register. And it also creates a class 6 felony if a county recorder or other person allows someone to register to vote and it's later determined they weren't a citizen. So even in kind of good faith mistakes, elections officials could be charged with felonies if folks end up registering to vote. In terms of early voting legislation, HB 1474, SB 1474, it's a pretty simple bill. It eliminates all early voting. So this would mean that voting can only occur on election day and no other days. You may have seen in the news there's also been a lawsuit filed by the Republican Party of Arizona claiming that early voting in Arizona is unconstitutional and all Arizonans should have to vote on election day only. That lawsuit was thrown out by the Supreme Court, but it could be refiled in the trial court. So we'll see if that happens. This bill has not moved past the floor in the Senate, though, so it's unlikely to pass this session. HB 1571, ballot drop boxes and surveillance. We're going to talk about this bill again in a minute in the Dropbox context, but it prohibits mail ballots from being returned by mail. So what this bill would do is say you can receive your early ballot in the mail. You can't mail it back, though. You have to take it in person and drop it off in person. This bill made it out of 2 committees, but has not made it past a floor vote and isn't expected to move forward at this point. And then drop boxes. This has been a huge issue both in Arizona and across the country. We've used drop boxes in Arizona for some time because of how many Arizonans tend to vote by mail, but in a number of places across the country, voting by mail was expanded significantly during COVID, and so drop boxes were new there. We did expand the number of drop boxes in Arizona in 2020. I think we have something like 150 drop boxes across the state now, and they're huge assets to voters that live in places like in rural Arizona where there might not be reliable mail service, or going to drop off your ballot in person somewhere might be an hour or 2 down the road. And so, but in terms of what we're talking about with drop boxes, because there's a lot of confusion around this, these are drop boxes. They are constructed of some really sturdy metal, and they're bolted into concrete. So they're very secure devices. They have a lock on them, so you can only open them with the key. So there's one up top from Yuma County, Pinal County, I think Navajo County. At the bottom, you can see Governor Ducey in 2020 dropping off his mail ballot into a Maricopa County drop box. And on the left, that's Senator Wendy Rogers, who has this session tried to end voting by mail and end the use of drop boxes. Here she is in 2020, dropping off her mail ballot into a Coconino County drop box. So some of the legislation we've seen, HB 2238, pretty simple, prohibits the use of drop boxes. So this form of returning your ballot that we've created that is very convenient for Arizonans, and it was pretty popular. This would just end the use of that. If you want to drop off your ballot here, you either have to mail it back or go into an actual polling location. Park your car, go into a polling location, and go drop it off instead of just dropping it in a drop box. And then 1571, this would require the use of smart drop boxes. So a drop box would have to accept only one ballot at a time. It would have to log the receipt. It would have to generate receipts for the voter. It would have to have video built into the Dropbox. There's a long list of things that would require. The point is, this technology doesn't exist. No one makes a smart Dropbox. So this bill would require all Dropboxes be smart Dropboxes and would functionally end the use of Dropboxes in Arizona. So that's the legislation we've seen this year. Like I said, only one bill has passed so far. The Attorney General sent a letter to the Senate President last week, advocating for a number of changes that have kind of stalled, including giving the Attorney General's office more power over elections, requiring additional forms of identification on mail ballots, all kinds of things. And so there is some thought that it could reignite some of these bills that haven't been moving. And so even though a lot of these we were considering dead at this time, nothing's over until the legislative session is over. And so we got to keep an eye out for these things that come back around. And I think after this, we're going to probably move on to some questions, but I'll turn it back over to Tanner.
Thank you so much. And it's very nice to meet you. We have a question in the Q&A, and then we're going to move to some that were brought to us during registration. Are Google Plus codes allowed to use as address for voter registration?
I can take that question, Tanner. Google Dropbox, Google Plus codes. Absolutely. We worked in the 2020 election with our county recorders to begin accepting Google Plus codes as a valid address. Before the development and release of Google Plus codes, we previously accepted latitude and longitude coordinates even. I'm really familiar with it because I'm a rural voter and work a lot with rural and tribal communities that don't have traditional addresses. And part of registering to vote is providing proof of your residence in the county. And you provide it by, we provide a small area on the registration form where you would essentially just draw a map to your house. X marks the spot in lieu of any kind of standard address. But Google Plus codes provides, meets that requirement and is really easy to use. So you can even use it to register online as well.
Okay, thank you, Donovan. And then someone in the asked a question through our registration process. What are the rights of those who are formerly incarcerated?
Hi, I'm Murphy Aber. I'm the Communications Director for the Secretary of State. I'm going to share a little bit about this and then probably tag Will, who has a deeper understanding. But basically, if you are formerly incarcerated, as Donovan mentioned in his presentation, you are able to, your rights are supposed to be automatically restored once you have completed your incarceration, and any fines or fees or punitive damages that you need to pay related to the incident that you were incarcerated for. What is interesting in that situation is sometimes that process is a little slow. So for folks who are convicted of one felony, it does behoove them to check with the courts to make sure that information has been updated with the county recorder's office so that your voting rights can be restored. I think after one felony, you can still petition to get your voting rights restored. And that's where I'm going to tag Will because he's a lawyer.
Yeah, Murphy's got it right. So if after your first offense, your rights are automatically restored. After that, or if you have not paid all your restitution, so either or, if it's more than your first offense or you haven't paid all your restitution after your first offense, you can petition the court to have your civil rights restored. And typically, if you go on your county court's website, they have forms and whatnot for you to be able to do that. There's also a number of organizations the ACLU and others that do kind of rights restoration workshops to help folks come in and fill out the forms and put all that together to submit to the court.
Restitution,
Thank you.
I was trying to think of and couldn't. Thank you, Will.
Okay, and then the next question is, can student college IDs, specifically ones authorized by a public university, be used as a form of identification of vote? If not, why not?
This was an awesome question. I can take it. And I had to double check with Murphy on this because she had front row seats to this whole debate in 2019 and 2020. But so college IDs are state issued. They do have a photo on it, but I believe they don't have an address. So you've got it. College ID has to be part of the mix and match list. You've got to bring a second document to show your address to meet that requirement.
I'm going to hop in with a couple of extra details there. Donovan's right. Typically the state, if you're using a college ID from a state university, that is technically a state issued ID. However, as Donovan said, in Arizona, I think all of the state IDs are missing the address. So they are not sufficient to qualify for voter registration on their own.
Okay, and then in the Q&A, we have a question that is, how do we find out our new legislative district?
I believe you can find the new district maps at the Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission's website. That's irc.az.gov.
You can also call your county recorder. So the districts have been updated by your county recorder's office at this point. And again, I'm going to lean on Will. I think at this point, if you use our voter portal on arizona.vote, the district should be updated there as well at this point. Is that right, Will?
I think that's probably right. Also, if you live in Maricopa, they have a tool on their website as well for you to enter in your addresses, your new districts as well. Maricopa,
Yeah, beballotready.com is there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. And then someone asked, what is being done to address the fact that SB 1485 and HB 2492 restrict voting in Arizona were not necessary because no evidence that voter fraud had ever occurred as a result of what those laws claim to address?
I'll answer this one. As I mentioned earlier, there were about 140 election-related bills introduced. A number of them have no basis in actual concerns or proven evidence of, deficiencies in election security or anything like that. I think the best thing people can do on this is, contact your legislator and let them know how you feel about it. There's a number of orgs throughout our state that work on these issues. And if you're really passionate about stopping some of these bills, I think one of the best things you can do is get plugged in with local organizations that are working on these issues every day.
Thank you. Let's see. The next question is, in my free time, I text bank to get out the vote. This last week, we focused on Arizona youth, and I was stunned at how they parroted GOP talking points and disinformation. Our elections are untrustworthy and rife with fraud, which justifies these laws passing. Usually, the younger generation is a little more hopeful. We have a messaging crisis. It runs so deep that even the young people of Arizona are eating it up, and I'm deeply concerned for our long-term future. And the question is, what is our plan to combat the impactful messaging that Republicans are using? How can we reframe this discussion to expose these lies?
I'm going to go ahead and jump in on this one, but also invite my colleagues to share their thoughts as well. But this is kind of my bailiwick, and it is a fantastic question. So first, I do need to sort of parse out the language in the question a little bit. The Secretary of State's office is a nonpartisan office. So the messaging that we utilize is designed specifically to speak to all eligible voters or all potential eligible voters, regardless of party affiliation. But to your point, I think that if you look at both sides of the aisle, that there are youth who are disengaged and unhappy with the way their government is working for them or not working for them. And I think the way that we can reframe that conversation is by starting it early, which we're seeing more and more evidence that shows that voting is a habit that is lifelong, especially if you start voting early. And so in talking about how to engage with some of the younger voters or younger potential voters, I think like with any good outreach, it starts with meeting folks where they are. So we need to be having conversations like these with young voters early on in their voting careers. I think another method that we are utilizing at the Secretary of State's office is this strategy called pre-bunking. So sort of attempting to predict what some of the misinformation or lies that election disruptors will utilize, sort of predicting that ahead of time and helping to educate the public well in advance of what the truth is. And the crux of that effort really stems on reminding folks who they can trust for election information. So you've heard the Secretary talk about it, you've heard Donovan talk about it. And I'll go ahead and echo too, like we are really big on promoting our trusted sources. Those trusted sources include your election officials at the county level, at the city level, and at the state level. We've got great partnerships with the Clean Elections Commission as well. And frankly, with community organizations like Equality Arizona. There's a reason why we approached Equality Arizona to help us host this community conversation. It's because we believe that they are purveyors of truthful information, and they come to us with election questions when they have them, and we are more than willing to oblige. So I think the bottom line is that it is very easy to get frustrated and it is very easy to lose hope. But I like to think of that as a temporary state. I definitely have experienced it, not only in my work with the elections community here in Arizona, but also at one point in time, I was actually a board member of Equality Arizona, and it was during a pretty tumultuous time. So there are moments of where it is easy to become disillusioned. But I think as long as we continue to have conversations like this and reminding folks that there are people who are engaged, we can take turns propping each other up. So I'm so grateful for that question. And yeah, if you want to talk to me some more, I'm going to go ahead and drop my email in the chat.
Thank you so much. We have a question in the Q&A. Are we getting new voting registration cards without new districts?
I can only answer as a Maricopa County voter who just got his in the mail this week. If you are a Maricopa County voter, you should be getting new voter ID cards in the mail. I know if you go to their beballotready.com or go to their social feeds, they've been talking about it as well, but mine came, I want to say on Tuesday. So if you're a Maricopa voter, you should have gotten those or be getting them very soon.
So those voter registration cards are issued by the county recorder's office. And so they're the ones who have authority over the information that is presented on the card. So we would encourage you to reach out to your county recorder and see what they have to say.
Okay, and then what voter suppression laws have actually passed into law? How many voters will be purged, and what loops will people have to jump through to get registered?
I'll take this as well. As I mentioned, there's only one bill that's actually passed so far this session, HB 2492. There are 2 lawsuits that have already been filed to try to block it. In addition, our legislature is actively working to delay implementation until 2023. So I think, and we'll keep folks updated on this, but we don't expect it at this point, at least, to be in effect for the 2022 elections. Seems like even those that support the bill actually don't want it to be in effect for this election. After that, there will obviously be litigation in federal court that in all likelihood will end up at the United States Supreme Court. So it could be a while before this issue is finally resolved, but we aren't actually expecting this to be in place for the 2022 election.
Thank you. And then we have a question that says, having been an election worker in 2020, what kind of security protections will be at vote centers in 2024? Thank you. Okay. And the question disappeared on me, but that was the basis of the question.
No problem. Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think, again, this is one of those areas where we really have to defer to the discretion of the county recorder and county election folks. They are the ones who handle poll worker training. They are the ones who handle setting up polling locations. But I can speak to some of those efforts sort of generally, and because for about 2 years I did work for Maricopa County Recorder's Office. I know that, especially if you were a poll, you are probably aware that there's sort of like a reporting chain of command when there are incidents at polling locations. So there are communication processes in place that allow for poll workers to get backup and security help. I know the safety and security of poll workers has been a huge conversation in the election community, especially with the ongoing threats to election officials and to the brave volunteers who are helping to actually administer our elections at the polling location. So I'm gonna have to defer this question again to our partners at the County Recorder's Office for more specific details. I will tell you that if you go to arizona.vote, you will find a list of contact information for all of the local county officials, and feel free to reach out. They all are very dedicated staff, and they all have very dedicated staff, and I'm sure will be willing to share with you some of their exercises. The other thing that I wanted to flag really quickly is we know that having uniformed police at some voting locations can be problematic for members of our community. And especially during the 2020 election, we knew that the potential for violence at voting locations was becoming more and more apparent. And ahead of that, as part of an effort to both empower the community and inform law enforcement of what helpful steps would actually be, like what community policing should look like at the polls, we did issue a law enforcement guide in 2020 from our office, which we distributed to law enforcement agencies across the state, because we wanted to make sure that protecting the safety of folks never intervened or interfered with their right to vote. And we know that safety is relative and it means different things for different communities. And we respect that. So I hope that's a helpful answer for you.
Thank you so much. And that was the end of the questions that we have. We really want to thank you for being with us, and thank the Secretary for joining us on this call. Thank Will, Donovan, Murphy. We really appreciate you being here. I have a question that I would like to ask, which is for LGBTQ Arizonans, why are voting rights important? Why does this matter to our community in particular? Trick question, I know, but
not a trick question. I just feel like I'm hogging the mic, so I wanted to make sure that Will and Donovan had an opportunity to chime in here.
I mean, I'm happy to, I'll defer to Donovan. Go ahead, please.
Sorry to jump in. I'm Navajo, and so I think the answer to your question will be the same answer for a question to my community. It's our voice. As Indigenous people, we were historically disenfranchised, and we faced a lot of the voter suppression efforts in the last several decades, and had to really kind of push to be able to access the ballot, and to exercise our freedom to vote. Voting is so important because it directly ties into the health and the existence of our community and affects directly our families and our loved ones. And that would be the same for any community across Arizona and our country.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. And with that, I would just like to say thank you to you. Thank you to everyone who attended. It's really important to stay informed about this and to get trusted information from the source. Here in Arizona, we live in perilous times, and you know, it's really good to stay informed. We're going to post again in the chat ways that you can get involved with Equality Arizona, and we're going to be having quite a number of get out the vote efforts, including in May. We're going to be doing we're going to be dropping off QR codes in a few different canvassing events. And so you can register to vote directly through our unique URL, which we were granted by the Secretary of State's office. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you for participating with us at this time of the evening. And Ken, thank you for being with us as well.